bringing you in-depth discussion from one of the most read group of online writers covering the Edmonton Oilers. Are you ready for Oilers Overtime? Join us as we talk news, rumors, trades, player grades, game results, and more, all featured on one of the most glorified teams in the NHL, from the great one to the next one, from the boys on the bus to the decade of darkness. This is Oilers Overtime.
Hey there, everybody. Welcome to another edition of Oilers Overtime with the Hockey Raiders. My name is Jim Parsons. As always, we've got our regular panel with us. This week, we've got Colton back. He was absent last week, so we didn't get a chance to talk about the defensemen, but we're going to be talking about goalies today. Colton, how you doing?
Good, thanks, guys. It was a good show last week. It looked like you guys were fine without me.
Yeah, but it's not the same. It's not the same without you here. It's not at all. And Julian Mongillo's with us. Julian, how are you?
I'm good. Good to have the gang back together for a nice new episode here.
Yeah, this is going to be an interesting one for sure. Brian, I'm sure we're going to have lots to talk about. Brian, how are you?
Doing well, Jim. How are you doing?
I'm doing good. So for anybody who's watching this for the first time, and hopefully you're not, but if you are, that's fantastic. We welcome you in. Hit the like button on Facebook, subscribe on YouTube, check out all the other content. But we talk specifically Oilers, and what we've been doing the last couple of weeks is taking each position and talking about what the future might be for the Edmonton Oilers. So the first time we talked forwards, last week we talked defense. This week, we're going to be talking goaltenders. My first question, and I'll start with Colton because he wasn't here last week, so we'll give him the floor immediately. What would you do if you're the Edmonton Oilers? Would you stand pat with the goaltending duo that you have, which is Mike Smith, potentially, as long as they sign him, which it sounds like they're probably going to try to do, and Mikko Koskinen, or would you go outside and look for a tandem that might be better, might be different, might be cheaper? I don't know. What would you do?
Yeah, I certainly look for one. I think there's not a ton of free agents that really grabbed my interest. I'd seen like Grubauer's one in Colorado, but I think the Avs are going to do everything to get him re-signed. I don't really expect him to hit the market. So I think if you can improve it, whether it's a trade or something you do, but I don't see a lot of free agents that I think are an improvement over Mike Smith. And if there's no trade, then Koskinen's likely back next year unless something happens with the buyout. So as far as free agents go, I'd say stand pat, but I would look to make a trade and see if you could improve it that way.
Julian, do you think there's a trade out there to be made for a guy like Mikko Koskinen? Like in Edmonton, fans tend to poop on the guy who doesn't have the greatest showing all the time. He's a decent goaltender, but he has these moments where he just seems to leak stuff. Like he has 75 to 85% of a strong game, and then 15% is just like what just happened. Do you think that is going to be allows the Oilers to make a trade if there's other teams that would be interested there, or is it really not a matter of that you can move this guy and you're sort of stuck with him for one more year?
I think you're good either way. I think if you're good to keep him and you're good to move him. It just seems like we've talked about it before. He kind of has mental lapses where it just goes from bad to worse for him, and it's hard for him to get back into that mindset after he's having such a good game and he lets in a bad goal, and it's hard for him to recover. It seems it's from time to time, and he gets caught up in his own head, I think. But in terms of maybe seeking a trade, I think there's always a trade to be made as long as the assets are on the table. So I think that is one of the ways they can go. But I'm a strong believer that there is a good amount of goalies on the market that they can target. And I think that, we talked, we're already talking about the big fish like Grubauer and even Freddie Anderson. I think Grubauer is like Colton said, is just less likely to move just because of his connection with Colorado. But maybe Freddie Anderson, because of how good Jack Campbell's been, could be there. And if they're looking for that starter bona fide number one, I think Anderson could be that guy to pair with Mike Smith. But you'd have to move on from Koskinen either through the buyout or through the expansion draft if you lose him that way. But I think the buyout is probably the easier bet.
I'd be surprised if the expansion draft sees Mikko Koskinen go anywhere. I think there's some other options that Seattle's going to look at there. Brian, what do you think? Is this one of those situations where you go, okay, let's get Mike Smith back for one more year. We've got one more year of Koskinen. We'll delay the goaltending decision for one more season. We'll take care of some other things first. Or is this a priority for Ken Holland where he's like, you know what, we've been there, we've done that. We need to go in a different direction. What would you do?
If they want to run this back for one more year, I'm good with that. I think I still look at this Oilers team with the contract situation, when these guys are going to be in their prime, when they're going to be best positioned to contend and hopefully win a championship, and when these guys are under contract, speaking specifically to the core of McDavid, Draisaitl, and then once they hopefully re-up Nurse here next year and get him locked in, I look at it being like sort of a window of 2022 to 2025, 26 as when this team will be best positioned to make a run every year. And so I make the goaltending decisions looking towards that. So if it means bringing back Smith for 1 year, then I think I'm okay with that. And we'll probably jump onto this later. But the one thing that I think that maybe isn't being talked about enough is Stuart Skinner. I think you need to give him 15 to 20 games at least now next season in the NHL to see what he's got. He's been great in the AHL. I think it's ready. He might be your guy. He might be the goalie of the future. He's going to be 23 next year. I think you need to see what you have. And if you come back with Smith and another veteran, be that Koskinen, be it Stalock or somebody else, Skinner's just going to continue to do what he does in the AHL, and they're not going to know what they have. They might have the guy in him for the future.
Okay, Brian, let me ask you this then before we move on. If you move on from Koskinen and Mike Smith and you hire or sign or trade for another starting goaltender, does that basically rule out Skinner? Like, is there no way that you can give them the games that you're thinking they need to give them?
Well, like if you have, maybe not. Maybe like, could you run with Smith and then have Skinner if he comes in and proves, that he can be a solid backup? Could you go with that? If you have Koskinen, you bury that Koskinen contract in the AHL. I don't know if they can do that. There's still the situation of Stalock, so it's a crowded crease right now. Maybe one of you guys know, I'm not sure what the situation is if they could bury the Koskinen contract in the AHL and run with Skinner as the backup.
Well, I could take a look and tell you if he's got any sort of no move clauses. My concern with Mikko Koskinen is that in trading him or moving him or buying him out, you're getting rid of a contract, sure, but you're also probably hamstringing yourself just a little bit. And I don't think he's fantastic. I certainly don't think he's got a long-term future with the Edmonton Oilers, but I don't think he's as bad as a lot of people make him out to be. So I'm all right with one more season of Koskinen on your books. And I don't know what Mike Smith's contract is going to look like. Like, he had a fantastic season, and I can't imagine that he's all of a sudden going to be like a $3 million goaltender. I don't think that, but is he going to get more than 1.5? Probably. You know what I mean?
Would there be room for three of them, whether that's Smith, Skinner, and then Koskinen or Stalock? Could they make that work?
My only issue with that is if you're looking ahead now, if you're going to run with Koskinen for 1 more year and then you're done with him, let's say after that season, get rid of the money off the books. You want to use him this year, that's fine. But the only issue with that going forward is if Stuart Skinner's not ready, you have only Stuart Skinner, and maybe who knows if Mike Smith's even going to be coming back for another year, right? And I'm looking ahead at the 2022-23 free agent class of goalies, and there's names that are still pretty old and almost not as good as what's available to them now. So I think that comes in and will play a big part. So you got guys in next year's free agent class like Fleury, Kemper, Koskinen, and Holtby, and Merzlikins is leading that class, which is not as deep as what it is now. So if they're going to go get their goalie, I think this is the year to do it.
It'll certainly be interesting. Colton, what do you think? Like, are you on board with this whole give Stuart Skinner a try? I've read and seen that this is one of those situations, like Brian said, this is a situation where you got to see what you got and you got to find out. And I wonder, can you test him? Can you give him the minutes or the games that he might need if you have any other combination than Smith and Koskinen? Because Ken Hall and Dave Tippett, that if you have those two coming back, there's a pretty decent chance that neither one of them are with you next year, and not next year, but the season after. And then, okay, well, if Skinner doesn't work out, we're starting from scratch. Or if he does work out, well, at least we have our backup in place.
Yeah. I hadn't really put a lot of thought to it. I didn't realize Skinner was already 23. Yeah, I mean, I think it's something to definitely consider. I just think the problem with going in with that tandem next year is, like, Smith was really good this year, but he could take a step back again next year. Like, he's 39, maybe even 40. And like, it wasn't like he was very good the last few seasons before. So I think you're putting a lot of hope in that he continues what, kind of looking at his stats, looks like a bit of an anomaly of a season. I do think he'll be okay, but I think it's just, if you're just banking on going in with him and Stalock, if they get rid of Koskinen, or even the three of them with Skinner, it's a pretty big risk, because you're hoping that Smith has a almost Vezina candidate like season like he did this year, which really I'm not that confident in that happening again.
Okay, so let's take a look at that scenario then. Let's just pretend theoretically that the Oilers are able to move on from Mikko Koskinen. Julian, if you're thinking that's the case, you're able to bring Mike Smith back. You're looking at him as a 1B, probably a backup. Who is the guy on the market that you are targeting? Because you were the one specifically that said that this is your year. It's not next year. It's probably this summer, that there are more options available to the Oilers. If you had to pick a name that you would target, you would go after. I know you're a Maple Leafs fan, so you know probably Frederik Andersen pretty well. Is he the guy that you would go after, or would you look at somebody else?
Well, I wrote a piece back in March about this, so offseason goalie targets. But one of the guys I didn't mention was Andersen, just because I didn't know how it would play out throughout the rest of the year with that injury concern. But it looks like that, given the Leafs specific cap situation, that Jack Campbell's probably going to be their guy going forward, and have to pair him up with somebody else and walk away from Andersen because they need that money elsewhere. So if Andersen is the guy and they're looking for that bona fide starter, I think he's the guy you throw your money at, and you pair him with Mike Smith. And then you have a tandem of either Andersen and Smith or Andersen and Skinner if Smith decides to either falls off or decides to retire the season later. So I think that's a safe bet. But I also have guys like lower off the radar guys, maybe a little bit, that you could pair with Smith this year, like Peter Mrazek. I think that Nedeljkovic has claimed his spot as the starter for the Hurricanes, and he's an RFA this year, so I'm sure they'll give him the money. And while they do need a backup, I think Reimer could do the job for them just as well. So Mrazek could be the odd one out there, and if he gets the money, he could be a viable option. And the other guy is Chris Driedger. Don't even know if I'm saying his name, or Driedger. I'm not sure. So either way, yeah, exactly. Either way. Bobrovsky has a bunch of question marks, but Spencer Knight came on strong in the playoffs for Florida, and he's clearly the goaltender of the future there. So that $10 million Bobrovsky contract's looking like it's going to be really tough to move unless they eat about half of it. So I think that if that's the case and that's their tandem, then Driedger, who could get a raise this year, and you throw money, it's a little bit of I guess more of a risk, because he did have a good season this year and even last, and he could be a good pairing candidate to be with Mike Smith.
Yeah, I think Driedger is probably one of those guys, that you consider maybe being an option for Seattle. I'm guessing that he might be a target of theirs, especially as a backup. I think the Seattle Kraken are going to wind up with 2 decent goaltenders out of this expansion draft, and then maybe for 3 free agency. My concern with Frederik Andersen might be that he's one of those guys that could get a lot of attention. I know Pittsburgh is very interested in him. There's going to be teams that are looking at him and saying, you know what, he's not nearly as bad as a lot of Toronto Maple Leafs fans have made him out to be. He's taken a lot of heat for his first round exits, but I don't know that that's necessarily all on him. His playoff numbers are actually half decent. So I don't think there's going to be a limit of teams that are after him. And my concern with someone like him is that if you get into a bidding war, and we saw this sort of last year with Jacob Markstrom, look how good that turned out that the Oilers were not able to get him. Like that he decided to go to Calgary, just sort of changed his mind. That's one of those you're like, whew, thank goodness that didn't plan out. I'm wondering if that's maybe a situation with Andersen. Not that I wouldn't like Andersen, but that if you overpay for him and all of a sudden he turns out to maybe not be the guy, I don't know. Colton, do you have a target? Do you have somebody that is on your radar that you would be looking at for free agency or in a trade?
Yeah, well, I think Mrazek's an interesting one. It's consistency with him over the years. Like his numbers this year were incredible. He was hurt for a long part of the season, but Driedger is one that's, again, like Julian said, really good numbers the last 2 years, but still pretty unproven, like in a backup role. So that's worrisome. I'm questioning if a team maybe will give him a bit much in free agency and whether or not that'll end up being a good idea. So I'm kind of like in the trade route more. I think Julian had mentioned him earlier for next year, but Elvis Merzlikins in Columbus, I think just they have 2 guys there with him and Korpisalo. So I think they'd be willing to move one of them in order to bring a player back or a prospect pick, whatever that may be. And then I was just looking at teams with 2 goalies right now, 2 capable ones. And the only other one really that I noticed was Vegas. And I know obviously Fleury is getting up there in age. He's probably going to win the Vezina this year, but then there's Lehner too. So it maybe if one of them would be able, if you'd be able to pry them out, I know it wouldn't be as cheap. So I think Merzlikins is the one that if they were going to make a trade, I would be really interested in him.
I'd certainly be kicking tires with Columbus. Like that's a team that's going to make a ton of changes, and they're going to have to get rid of one of their goaltenders. I think. Like I don't know who they're going to move, and I think they believe that they don't care which one it is, as long as they get a decent return for whoever they do move. So if they're moving Merzlikins or they're moving Korpisalo, as long as the return is better for one or the other, I think that's who they end up moving. So I would certainly check with them and just to see, and you never know. I mean, that trade could turn into a whopper because there's a lot of people on that roster that Columbus might be turning over. Brian, what about you? You got a target, somebody in free agency or by trade that you're like, this is the guy that I think Colin should go after?
Not particularly, and that's probably what influences what I was saying earlier too. I mean, obviously somebody like Grubauer, if he'd be the one guy for sure. But I don't think, as you guys have pointed out, he's likely sticking around in Colorado. I mean, if you can get a guy like that, other than that, I'm with you, Jim. It's like I look at all these guys and they all have upsides, but there's each one of them seems to have a but about them, right? There's just no one you're sure about it. And you made the point with Markstrom. The Oilers could get stuck with a contract like that, which is one reason why I'm okay with running with this situation for one more year. Similar to what they have right now, Mike Smith and whoever is your other as your backup. But I think it was Julian was mentioning that the free agent class for the year following in 2022 is not very good either. So they may have to explore a trade market. I don't know, but other than there's really isn't anyone that jumps out to me, and that's probably part of why just what I said I am, because there's just isn't a home run goalie for them to take.
I think Grubauer is going to be interesting to watch because I get the sense of Colorado is going to have major money concerns. Now, I'm on board with you guys thinking that he's probably going to stay, but I am very curious to see how much of a discount he needs to take to make that work. I've heard that he's interested in doing that and that he's okay with taking less than he probably gets on the open market. But Colorado is a team that, holy moly, they got Cale Makar's deal to worry about. They got Landeskog to worry about. They got a lot of stuff that they got to do internal housekeeping wise. And I think Grubauer is going to have to be all right with taking a lot less than he might be interested in taking. And if he gets to the open market and he sees what's out there and the offers, including maybe one from Edmonton, I don't know. There's got to be a thought. He's 29 years old. He's really not, had that experience to be a vet starter somewhere. He's going to get an opportunity to do that, both in Colorado and somebody else. But man, if you're leaving millions of dollars on the table over 4 or 5 years, 6 years, that's hard to turn down. So I'd certainly kick tires on him. Outside of that, I don't know. I see a lot of veteran guys on the market in the free agency, but I see a lot of them staying where they are. Rask is probably going to stay in Boston if he plays again. Halak's probably going to stay in Boston. Renes, if he doesn't retire, is probably going to stay in Nashville. Dubnik's not going anywhere. Ranta maybe, but I don't know. There's a lot of guys on this market that probably are going to stay put. So it'll be very interesting to see what happens there. If we're talking about Mike Smith coming back, Colton, I'll start with you. What's the number look like? What are we talking about for a deal here? Because what was he this year? He was one and a half
with 500K bonuses, I think.
Now, so based on his season and how good it was, and he could have technically been in the Vezina conversation, but clearly there were better goaltenders and it made sense to not have him in there, but he might have been in the top 6, top 7. What do you give him?
Well, I think with him, he's a guy that it's pretty obvious, I think, just wants to win at this point in his career. So I think he's made enough money. He had a pretty couple good contracts in Arizona. So I think he's more just going to do whatever it is to help the team out. That being said, if he wanted to get a raise, I'm sure he's in line for one. Like you said, he was a lot better this season than the year past when he got that $1.5 million contract. So as big of a raise as he could get, I don't think a ton. I can't see a team giving anything too crazy on the open market just because, like we said, his age. But I mean, if he wanted to go up maybe 500,000, $1 million, but I don't think he's too concerned about that. So I think his contract will be pretty similar next year.
Brian, do you agree? Is he in a situation now where he looks at this team and he says, look, because we know and have heard everything about Mike Smith inside the locker room, off the ice, on the ice, just how much of a team guy he is. He's probably, outside of the core, McDavid, Draisaitl, Nurse, and that leadership group, he's basically the leader in this locker room. Does he look at this roster and go, look, I got to do what I got to do. Like Golden said, I've made my money. I want to be with a team. I'm staying here. Does he look at that and say, look, dude, sign me for whatever you got to sign me for. Just get a good team around me.
Yeah, I think, I think he has earned a bit of a modest raise, and they could give him that without breaking the bank. I mean, nothing too ridiculous, whether that's 2.25, whatever. I mean, and they can make that work. So I see that. And get Colton saying, I don't think there's going to be anybody throwing a lot of stupid money at him out there. you mentioned like Tikaras, for example, or even Rena if he doesn't retire. If another team wants to bring in like a veteran free agent goalie that may be on his last legs, but may just have that experience that's enough to get you there, I think those would be the ones they target first. So I just don't think there's going to be a huge market for Smith as well as he did play this year. And he did play great. So yeah, I think they can get this done in a reasonable amount. And I think Smith would be happy coming back for just, a slight raise.
Okay, Julian, I have an interesting question for you. So we saw what Devon Shore signed for, and we saw how people freaked out about what Devon Shore signed for. And it was like barely league minimum. It's a depth guy, might not even play all the time. Having said that, here's where I'm going with this. If Mike Smith signs for, say, $2.5 million, how much do people freak out?
I don't know. I don't think it's a major concern just because, I mean, fans are fans, so they'll probably freak out no matter what happens. And it really doesn't matter. I mean, whether it's Toronto or the Toronto market or Edmonton market, those fans are kind of one and the same. So they'll probably freak out nonetheless, but I don't think it'll be that bad. I mean, 2.5 is a little bit much. I think a 2 million mark is good, or 1.5 with 500K bonuses again. I wouldn't be surprised if it's around there, like Colton and Brian were saying. So that wouldn't surprise me. But again, just looking into the future, I think that he's a great guy to have on your team as long as he wants to keep coming back, but he needs to have a capable guy to carry the weight with him. Koskinen just, I don't know, he didn't do a good enough job this year. And I think that moving forward that you need to have that secondary guy. So whether it's Mrazek or guys like Dreger, Olmark that could come in and split it almost right in half and then have that upside to be a number one on what would be a really good contract bargain for what they would get paid for this year, probably coming off their deals that they're currently on. I think that's what the Oilers need to be looking for, is to get a good deal on a potential number one goaltender of the future to pair with Skinner down the road.
Okay, so Brian, we lost Colton for a second. I'll go to Colton here in a minute here. If we assume that Mike Smith's going to be back, and we assume that Mikko Koskinen is going to be here as well for one more year, and that there's not a huge change, what's your game allotment look like? Like, how many games do you give Mike Smith, who's probably on the last year? They're going to go year by year, but I'm going to assume it's probably the last year. We're probably seeing the last year of Mikko Koskinen. We're looking at maybe, I'm assuming Alex Stalock might get picked up or moved or something, and maybe Stuart Skinner. Like, how do you split this up? Like 1A, 1B, 80-20, like it's an 82 game season, we're assuming. So how many games do you give Mike Smith at 39, almost 40 years old?
Yeah, I think he certainly has the, he's in a condition where he could probably give you 50 games, 50 plus games if you needed that out of him. Bearing in mind, you don't want to burn him out for the playoffs because we hope it's going to be a long run in the playoffs next year. So whether that's a 50-30 split, I want to see Skinner get in there for 15 games too. I don't know if we can make this work contract wise where they can split this 3 ways, maybe say 45-20-15 split, something like that. But yeah, I'm not concerned with Mike Smith's conditioning or his health that he can't give you 50 games and then go ahead and give you however many rounds starting every game in the playoffs, however many rounds that may be.
Colton, if the change is not made this summer and there's not another goaltender added, do you think the combination of Mike Smith and Mikko Koskinen is enough to get the Oilers through the first round playoff series? Because that's really the goal here, right? No, it's not necessarily to win the cup, although that would be wonderful. We're looking at 1 year, more than one round playoffs, and the goaltending has got to be a major contributor to get that through. Can these two do it?
It all depends on how Smith comes back next year. Like I said, if you'd asked me that last offseason, I would have said no. But then he had this season, like this great year. So, and he was fantastic in the playoffs, I thought, again. I want to say yes. I think I don't expect him to be as good as this season, but I think he'll be fine. So if he can play closer to this year than he had the past few, then sure, because I don't have a lot of confidence in Koskinen being that guy.
Julian, are you prioritizing the goaltending anywhere near the top? Like, is it forward defense goaltending? Is it forward goaltending defense? Like, what are you prioritizing if you're Ken Holland this summer?
Okay, let's not sugarcoat this. That tandem is not good enough to win in the playoffs. Let's not sugarcoat that. But that's why I think that goaltender has got to be top priority, considering the class next year and the opportunity they have this year to get a good guy who has that starter upside on a good deal. I think it's a no-brainer that goaltending needs to be addressed number one, and all the other pieces can fall into place after. It would be goaltending, forward, defense for me. And I think that just because of the goaltending class this year, it has to be addressed now. And you have the opportunity with the expansion draft to move some contracts around. So for me, you find the money to do what you need to do in that order: goaltending, forwards, defense.
I totally hear where you come from. I'm going to respectfully disagree with a couple caveats, with a couple asterisks here. I do agree that the expansion draft is going to give you an opportunity to do some things that you wouldn't normally otherwise be able to do. That said, depending on what Ken Holland does, and I am very concerned, I'm going to give him the benefit of the doubt, but I am a little weary about what he does this summer and how he spends the money. I've seen his history. He goes after big names. Sometimes he strikes out. Sometimes he actually gets them. If he spends too much on the goaltending, that is concern for me. And I don't actually mind this combination if you get Mike Smith at the right number. If you're not overspending for him and you can get him in on a decent deal, I'm okay with it. I also believe that come the trade deadline, if the Oilers are in the thick of things, and I think they will be regardless of the goaltending tandem, they'll still be in the playoff hunt. You can add at that time if you absolutely have to. And then you can maybe go out and grab a piece that'll put you in like kind of Dwayne Rollison type of situation. Remember when they did that and just went on a run? Like I see that happening. So I think the bigger priority is probably forward and then maybe goaltending, because I think there are some internal pieces where the defense is pretty decent. And if you can go out and get a big fish, fine. But I don't think you want to be too whatever because you got some pieces there. But the goaltending, I don't know. I think you're going to spend too much or the piece is just not going to fit. You got contract situations to worry about. And if you need to, you can get there for the playoffs. But I also don't know if this combination is going to be good enough. Like Colton said, if Mike Smith doesn't come back and he's not at the top of his game, Mikko Koskinen, I do believe, is not a part of this team's future. So I don't know. I mean, they got to be on and we'll see how it goes, but it'll be very, very interesting. I did want to ask you guys just what your reaction is. I know it's not talking goaltending and we brought it up a little bit, but I do want to get your reaction because we did this and we found out about this after we did the forward segment. So totally off topic, but still Oilers. Brian, what was your reaction to the Devon Shore signing?
My reaction to everybody else's reaction or just my reaction?
Either one.
I'll leave. Yeah, I thought it was, I think I've talked about this in the past. I'm a big Devon Shore fan. I was kind of surprised it was 2 years. I don't know if I would have signed him for 2 years, but it's like you said, it's barely over league minimum. It's a contract they can bury in the minors. I didn't think it was big of a deal. I thought it was, I think he's a Ken Holland guy that Ken Holland really loves and Tippett as well. And they rewarded him for, he's a blue collar guy. This is the kind of player that through much of the 90s, this is like the populated the Oilers roster. This is the kind of guy that they just stacked up and down the lineup, and they might get them to the playoffs, and they might get them out of the first round every 5 or so years. So, but I like him. I think he gives you. I think he's good. Good on the PK. I think he's a pretty savvy player. Just a good depth guy to have, and I got it for 2 years now. So.
Colton, does his signing, the Devon Shore deal, and Ken Holland, I don't want to say prioritizing first because I don't believe that's what he did, but does that give you any leery concerns, any worry over what they do going forward with other contracts, including the goaltending?
No, I could go on about the reactions of that for a while, but I mean, it's $850,000. Yeah, I didn't have a problem with it at all. Like, I think the last time I was on, we kind of said one under the radar guy we'd like to see come back. And I think we were all in agreement that Devon Shore was that was kind of the number one guy. So yeah, I think the some of the outrage is a little much on this. And I think just like you see all the analytics and everything, but I don't think it takes into account, like, he's not a guy that they're throwing out there for offensive zone draws very much and stuff like that. So that plays a part in it too. And I think, sometimes it's just looking at a sheet of paper, I think, a bit too much rather than what the player actually contributes to the team.
What about you, Julian? Do you see the analytics argument? Do you look at Shore and what he does when you're maybe not necessarily looking at the analytics? Do you relate that in any way to Holland's search for a goaltender? Because you're the one guy that's like, you got to fix the goaltending this summer. you really got to look at it. Does it concern you as to what he'll target and what he'll spend when you see what he did with Devon Shore?
I don't think it's concerning. I'm not sure why Oilers fans are all up in the air about it. I mean, at the end of the day, he's still just a depth forward at best, or fourth line center, or fourth line player at least, if they want to put him on the wing. But I mean, I think he was an RFA, so it might have been 2 years because they probably got an extra year in there because of his RFA status. I'm not sure if that had a part to play in it, but at the end of the day, it's $850,000, like we said. I mean, the thing that I looked at was that, you know, they lost Gaetan Haas obviously to Europe, and another depth forward who they used on the penalty kill when he was in the lineup. So I think that's kind of a straight swap almost. And Devon Shore is almost maybe a little bit more defensively responsible too. You know, he's been around the league and you know, paid his dues kind of. So I don't think it hurts you in any way, and I don't think it should influence our, I guess, outlook or on Ken Holland and his decision making. You know, Holland's been here for a long time. I think he knows what he's doing, and hopefully we'll see that come the summer.
Last question before we close things off. Brian, I'll start with you. We've covered the forwards, we've covered the defense, now we've covered the goaltending. How drastic of an offseason in terms of change do you think we're looking at here for Oilers fans, and what Ken Holland will do? He's got tons of money. I think $23 million in cap space, potentially more if he does buyouts and other things, maybe including guys like Mikko Koskinen. How big a change are we looking at here?
I honestly don't think we're going to see anything too drastic. I think tires will be kicked. I think there'll be a lot of rumors and innuendo and people will get excited. But at the end of the day, I don't think we'll see too much drastic. I think, you know, I'm leaning towards that RNH is going to resign and come back here. I don't expect a big free agent splash. As we've talked about, you know, if there's guys out there, I'm sure they'll be in play on them. But I think this roster, once the smoke clears, is going to look pretty close to what it did this year.
It'll be interesting if we're talking about all this money, but I'm with you a little bit. Like, I do think eventually Nugent Hopkins gets done. They're talking about going back to the table here and maybe adding an extra year or two to get that number around 5.5. I think Adam Larson signs. I wouldn't even be shocked if Tyson Barrie resigns, although I do think he's going to wind up somewhere else. I don't know. Everything I hear Ken Holland say about his goaltending is that he actually likes this duo. So I'm not sure that he's going to make drastic changes there. And I think once you start spending on Nugent Hopkins, Larson, maybe even Kulikov, guys that you might bring back, a lot of that $23 million is gone.
Yeah.
Colton, what about you? How much change do you think we see here? Are you kind of the same? Like, we're going to see a lot of the same roster back, or we're going to see a lot of new faces?
No, I think originally I was kind of looking when the season had first ended. I don't know if just out of frustration or what, but a bunch of the guys I thought they could bring in a top six left winger, all that. And then, like you guys both said, you all of a sudden realize, like, some of these players that are UFAs that we're talking about bringing back, the Nugent Hopkins, the Larsons, right there is probably, I don't know, 10 million, I would say, at least. Like, it's not, there's not as much cap space as it seems, because they're losing a lot of guys that if they don't replace them, then there's a lot of holes. So I don't think it's going to be there'll be a few guys, but I don't think there'll be any like blockbuster signings like Brian said. I don't think anything that's going to seem too crazy or out there.
What about you, Julian?
I'm going to say that it's going to be a bigger overhaul than you guys think it might be. I think you guys are saying, you know, a little bit stay pat almost with what you have. I think we're going to see 2 to 3 new bigger faces in the lineup. I think it's all very dependent on what happens with Nugent Hopkins, obviously, because if he's not back, then I expect him to sign a big fish to replace on that line. And I think it's also very dependent on what they do with James Neal and Mikko Koskinen. If you can lose those contracts, then for sure, I believe that there's going to be a big overhaul with some bigger faces coming in. But if those contracts don't get moved, that money's going to run out pretty quick between the guys that they have to deal with. And until we figure out if one of those guys isn't coming back, we won't know if a bigger name is going to come in. But I still think that we're going to have a lot of new faces here in Edmonton.
Yeah, I don't doubt that we're going to see some new faces for sure. I think Thomas Tatar might be among the guys that they kick tires on. I think there may be a trade maybe with Tampa or Columbus. I think there's opportunities there. I do see some new faces here. I am thinking that the Oilers and Holland, they kind of like this team, but it just sort of needs a facelift. I don't know that he does everything in one summer. I don't know if he tries to do everything in one summer. The one thing we know about Ken Holland is he's patient, right? He has spent a lot before, and he's got out and tried to get big fish before, but he doesn't typically do it all in one shot. And so I don't know that we're going to see that sort of, and you got to reserve some space for Darnell Nurse. You got to reserve some space for some other names that are coming up here for new contracts. So if you go crazy and you spend all that money, then you might have pooched yourself in 2 years' time. So it'll be very interesting. All right, guys, that's the conversation on goaltenders. I appreciate it. I have no idea what we're going to talk about next week, but I'm sure we'll have lots to talk about. There'll be content. I'm sure we'll come up and we'll have plenty of space to talk about it. But I appreciate you guys filling us in, both on the forwards, the defense, and the goaltenders. For everybody else who's watched us, thank you very much. Again, hit the notification button to get future videos. Hit the like button, thumbs up. It always helps us on YouTube. If you're watching this on Facebook, hit the like button, share this with other people, and check out a bunch of the great content that is on the Hockey Raiders, because there are some fantastic interviews on there right now, including Jackie Redmond on one of the channels and Derek Hardy for the Red Wings. Like, there's some really good stuff there. So check it out, you guys. Thank you very much, and we will talk to you guys next week. This has been another edition of the Oilers Overtime on the Hockey Raiders.